as believers are not to be discouraged. We cannot say, woe is me, woe is the world, all is lost, because it is not. As bad as things are now, and I know I've been in this world for a while now. I've never seen it any worse than what it is, or like we used to say back home, it's not any worse than it's ever been. But the truth is, I think every generation will look back over their generation and say it couldn't get any worse. Just imagine now, you all, you didn't live at this time, did you? The Roaring '20s? Anybody here from the Roaring '20s? Or, back at that time, what were your grandparents? What do you think your grandparents or your great-great-grandparents were thinking about the kind of world we were living in? They were thinking, the world's, it's just going to pot. The world is so evil. It's never been this bad so much. And then what do? You get to my generation in the 60s, where there's so much, right, Paul?
How about the Beatles?
Yeah, the Beatles come in. Oh, man, those guys with long hair and taking all the generation away to the devil. And then you get down to, another. It's just the way it is, and it just seems like every generation thinks it's not going to get any worse. But it does. But what Jesus is trying to say to us, even as we see in our world, evil seems to be winning on every hand, that is not a time for us to be discouraged. It's not a time for us to throw up our hands and say that we're fighting a losing battle. We talk a lot here, especially I've noticed lately, and it's a good discussion, but we're talking a lot here lately about how our numbers seem to be going down, our attendance is going down, our interest is going down. It seems like, we're getting weaker and weaker and weaker. Well, all that may be true, but that's no time to get discouraged. That's no time for us to say we're fighting a losing battle. Who knows what God may bring our way to bring a revival. The last time I saw this church house full on a Sunday morning was the Sunday after the tornado. Hey, maybe God will bring another one. Or maybe God will do something to get our attention, to bring us to Him. So don't get discouraged, even in the face of evil that's coming. So number one, God will not abandon this world. Number two, don't become discouraged in the increase of evil. Just remember this, the prelude of destruction is the introduction of the recreation. All right, number three, these words tell us that there's going to be both a judgment and a new creation. Both of these things are certain. Now, the value of these pictures here, you talk about verse 29 here. The sun will be darkened, the moon will not give light, the stars will fall from the sky. I remember one time I was standing out in the foyer, and this young lady, I don't know that she's ever been back, but she was here this particular Sunday, and she came out and shook my hand, and she was very serious. And she said, "What do you think about the blood moon?" And I thought, I wonder where this conversation is headed. And she wanted to know about the blood moon. And I told her, I said, well, the blood moon is an expression used for the certain color that the moon casts when the sun is shining a particular way, and the refractions in the atmosphere of the earth makes the moon appear like it's red like blood. I don't think that was the explanation she was looking for. I think she was looking for something much more dramatic, something, that cosmoclistic, kind of thing. I think that's what she was looking for. But what I'm trying to say is, don't get lost in the details. The picture. Have you ever looked at a painting or a picture, and it's a very beautiful piece of landscape, let's say, and then there's a little dot somewhere, and everybody focuses on the little dot, and they miss the whole beautiful picture, all the details of the picture, the painting. Well, that's what happens with a lot of people. Some people want to know, what does the seventh horn on that dragon in the book of Revelation mean? I don't have a clue. Don't have a clue. All I can tell you is that God's going to win. And that's the picture that Jesus is trying to paint. He's not trying to get us to look at details. He wants us to see the eternal truth that's being taught here. God will not abandon us. Evil will increase, but that doesn't mean we should give up. And so that's what he's talking about here now. All right, now look with me as we work our way through this. Verse 6 through 8 we looked at. Now let's look at verse 9 and 10. Verse 9 and 10, he says, "Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you'll be hated by all nations because of me. At that time many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other." All right, the persecution here. One of the things you got to admire about Jesus is that he is honest. His honesty shows through here. And what he's saying to us as the church is that becoming a disciple is not going to be easy. It's not an easy, comfortable way. It's not an easy road to take. You will endure persecution. And the real church will always endure persecution because we are in the world. And in the world and the church will always be at odds with each other. And there will always be persecution. And so sometimes people want to try to somehow, some way, get us on the good side of the world. That's not going to happen. I mean, the reality. Now, I'm not saying we need to bait the world and be persecuted for it. That's a misunderstanding. But whenever you live the true, genuine Christian life, you will be persecuted. It will happen. Paul writes, all those who live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. Now, if you say to me, I've never been persecuted, Jerry, that's saying a lot about you. It's saying something about your Christianity. Because God says it's not the way it's going to be. Now, here's some things we can think about in this text. Why do we suffer persecution? Well, one of the reasons why is because the Lord demands a new loyalty. The Lord demands a loyalty to Him. And He does not compromise that in any way. And we need to realize that all our earthly relationships are to be second. And the Lord is to be first and number one in our lives. Number two, Christ offers a new standard. Anyone who does not want to change, and I guarantee you there are a lot of people out there who don't want to change their lifestyle, they are bound to hate Christianity. Because that's what Christianity is about. Christianity is about change. Now, there used to be a time in our fellowship when we talked about change agents. I think since then we've kind of wised up and realized that's what Christianity is. It's a change agent. It changes you. And so if you don't want to be changed, well, that's why the world's going to hate you. And number three, we've been called to be the light of the world. To be the light of the world means that we are to be examples. Now, it doesn't mean we criticize the world. It doesn't mean we judge the world. I'll talk about that tonight in our lesson. But it does mean that when our light shines, the ugliness in the lives of other people is revealed. And whenever that ugliness is revealed, people attack. People don't want to change. And so they persecute us. So Jesus is talking about that here. And he warns his disciples of this persecution that will take place. Now go back to verse 4 and 5. Jesus says here, watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, claiming I am the Messiah, and deceive many. Now look over at verse 11 through 13. And many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. But the ones who stand firm to the end will be saved. Now look down at verse 23 through 36. So if anyone tells you, there he is, out in the wilderness, do not go out. Or here he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as lightning that comes from the east is visible, even in the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever there is a carcass, there the vultures will gather. Immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened. So through verse 27 there, or 26, that's where I'm supposed to stop, I'm sorry. Now, there are two threats he's talking about here to the church. Again, we're talking about the parousia. If you look at verse 3, the word is used there. When he says Jesus was sitting and they came to him and they said, what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? The end of the age is the word parousia. Verse 27. We get over there. For as lightning comes from the east is visible even in the west, so it will be the coming of the Son of Man. Again, the word parousia is used. Verse 37. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the coming of the Son of Man. Again, reference to the second coming. Verse 39, here's the fourth reference. They knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. So there are the four references to parousia, used only in this gospel, in this chapter. Now, what does this text mean? What's he talking about here? Well, the reference here is ultimately the triumph of Christ. He will one day be Lord of all men. That's one of the lessons that's being taught here in this text. Ultimately, he will be the Lord of all. You remember Paul writes that at his coming, every knee will bow and every tongue shall confess that he is the Christ. Now, the second thing this teaches us is this, is that history is in a goal. History is going somewhere. There's a point in history. Now, in the philosophies of the world, there are all types of different thoughts about history and that sort of thing. For example, in India, you have what we could call cyclical history. You've heard such a thing as reincarnation. That's what Hinduism teaches. It teaches a cyclical history. History's going in a circle. You know, you're born as a man, and then you live your life, and if you lived a good life, you get to come in a higher caste. Then you come back in another caste, and then so on and so forth, and it goes around and around and around. Christian history is linear. It has a line, and that line is going to a point. It's going to a place somewhere, and that place is the judgment. And that's what's one of the lessons that Jesus is trying to teach us here about this. So, now, look down at verse 32 through 31 now. Look with me there. Quickly. Our time's almost out here, but we can just touch on this point here. 32 and following. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see all these things, you will know that it is near, right at the door. Truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away till all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Now let me stop right there. There seems to be a contradiction here. Verse 32, it seems like the Lord's saying, you can tell when it's getting close. And then he turns right around, and you look at verse 34, he says, this generation will not pass away till these things happen. And then you get down to verse 36, and he says, no one knows the day nor the hour. So there seems to be a contradiction. So what is it that he's saying here? Well, let's read on a little bit. But about that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. 2 men will be left in the field, one will be taken, the other left. 2 women will be grinding with hand mill, one will be taken, and the other left. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know what day your Lord will come. All right, so if verse 32 and verse 33 is talking about, you can look at the newspaper, you can watch TV, and you can watch the news, and you can come up with when the Lord's coming. That's what some people say. But then you turn around verse 36 and following, he said, nobody knows. That's God's business. So what's that mean? Well, I want you to go back with me quickly here and look at verse 34, just briefly here. Look at what he says in verse 34. He says, truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. All right, so what does that mean? Well, there are 3 possibilities. The first possibility is that the Lord was referring to the second coming. And if he was referring to the second coming, that means he was mistaken, because it didn't happen then. And so, that maybe is the possibility. Some scholars believe that's possible because Jesus was human, just like us, and he had limitations just like us, and therefore would not have known exactly about the date, and he just got it wrong. That's the way they say it. It's hard for me to believe that we can say Jesus is wrong about one of the most important spiritual truths that you can find in Scripture. That's one of the explanations. Well, I got to stop there. We'll pick up next week and continue with this.